Every man in Alexander the Great's empire wanted her dead. She was carrying his only legitimate heir. She had no army, no allies, no one willing to fight for her, and she outlasted every single man who tried to take her son's throne. History called her a war prize. History was wrong. Her name was Roxana of Bactria, and in 323 BC, the night Alexander the Great died in Babylon, her real story began. To understand what Roxana did, you first need to understand where she came from. Bactria, a mountainous region in what is now northern Afghanistan, one of the hardest places Alexander ever tried to conquer. It took him nearly 3 years. The people knew the terrain. They used it. They bled his army slowly. Roxana's father was one of the last to surrender. He retreated to a mountain fortress his people believed could not be taken. Alexander took it anyway, and that's where he met her. And from that moment, she was no longer just a noble's daughter. She was inside the most powerful war machine the ancient world had ever seen, watching, learning how power actually worked. But before we get to what she did after Alexander died, you need to understand the world she was about to step into, because it wasn't just dangerous, it was unstable, and it was already starting to fracture. Greek historians say Alexander fell in love with her, that he refused to take her as a concubine, and insisted on marriage, that this was unusual, even scandalous. What they don't examine is what this meant for her. She was a noble's daughter in a conquered land. Marriage wasn't romance, it was survival. And from that moment forward, she became the most politically significant woman in the empire. She just didn't have the power to use that position, not yet. She didn't survive what came next, but she lasted longer than almost every man who tried to destroy her. And that's the part nobody talks about. The marriage caused immediate outrage in Macedonia. Alexander's generals were furious. His mother Olympias was reportedly appalled. They expected him to marry within the system, a Macedonian noblewoman, a Persian princess, someone whose bloodline reinforced power. Instead, he chose someone from the frontier, a barbarian, in their words. What they didn't understand was that Alexander wasn't building a Macedonian kingdom anymore. He was building something new. Roxana wasn't a mistake. She was proof of what he was trying to create, and she was watching all of it, learning who held power, who resented it, who was waiting. For 8 years, she lived inside the center of empire. When Alexander died in 323 BC, she was pregnant with his child, and if that child was a son, he would inherit everything. Roxana understood exactly what that meant. What happened next became known as the Wars of the Diadochi, the Wars of the Successors. The men who had fought beside Alexander for decades turned on each other immediately. Ptolemy took Egypt, Seleucus took Persia, Antigonus moved on Asia Minor. Everyone was claiming territory, everyone was building armies. And everyone knew about Roxana's child. If she gave birth to a son, he would be the rightful heir, which meant he was either the most protected person in the world or the most endangered. Roxana didn't wait to find out which. What Roxana did next is the reason historians still argue about her today. Alexander had 2 other wives, Stateira II, daughter of the Persian king, and Parysatis II. Both had claims. Both could produce a rival heir. Roxana understood something no one wanted to say out loud. As long as they were alive, her son was not safe. So she removed them. Roxana had them killed. Ancient sources say she lured Stateira with a forged letter, promising a summons, a reunion. Instead, she was murdered. Her body and Parysatis's were thrown into a well. This is where historians often stop. They call her jealous, violent. But look at her situation. She was alone a foreign woman in a court full of men who had no reason to protect her. She had no army, no allies, no power base. She had one advantage, her son. And she protected him the only way she could, with precision, without hesitation. Her son was born soon after, Alexander IV. For years, she navigated shifting alliances, choosing which men to trust, which ones to avoid, and how to keep her son alive in a world that wanted him gone. She couldn't hold it forever. In 316 BC, Roxana and her son fell into the hands of Cassander, one of Alexander's most ruthless successors. He imprisoned them in the fortress of Amphipolis. They were kept alive for years, a symbol, a threat, a bargaining piece. Then, in 310 BC, he had them both killed. Alexander IV was 13 years old, Roxana in her mid-30s. She had survived the collapse of an empire, assassinations, betrayal, war. 13 years in a world that had no place for her. She outlasted almost every man who tried to control it. Roxana of Bactria. Not a queen by birth, not a conqueror by force. A woman who understood power better than almost anyone around her. History called her a war prize, but she survived longer than the empire that claimed her. If this story moved you, subscribe to her sacred legacy. There are more women like Roxana, and history has been quiet about all of them. The next story is coming. You don't want to miss it.